Hello everyone, I'm Yogi, one of the legal advisor of Stone Indonesia, with Terje Nilsen in here, CEO of Stone Indonesia. We will talk and having discussion regarding the foreign investment and or we common know like PTPMA. Okay, first question is, what kind of the PTPMA? What is the?
I think we start with what a PTPMA actually is, and I guess the easiest way to explain that to foreigners, which most of our clients are, is that it's a private limited or a PTY LTD. That to me is the easiest way to define what a PTPMA is. And under Indonesian law, whether it's 100% foreign owned or even just 1% foreign owned, the definition under Indonesian law, it'll still be a PTPMA, which means permodal asing or foreign capital investment.
Yeah, because in here in Indonesia, there are, from the investment perspective, there are actually two kind of the investment, right? So either the foreigner and also for the local investment itself, or we call it like PMDN in here. What is the benefit, I mean, from the foreigner, which is when they want to set it up the PMA in here, and what are basically the benefit that they get?
Well, I think there's many things to consider, but I think what's important for foreigners to know is if you want to do business in Indonesia, there is no other way but through a PMA. You can probably through some foreign, trading companies, invest in the stock exchange and so on. But to do business within any kind of business stream in Indonesia, you must have a legal entity set up for that. So PTPMA is actually the only way that you can invest. And I think the main aspect that you always do, whether you set up this PMA, I guess we'll talk about shareholders. And what's important to know is that by law, you always need minimum two shareholders. It cannot be only one. Composition of shares, I think, is irrelevant in the sense that you can have a 99%, 1%, or 50-50. But I think what we see a lot in particular here in Bali is that people kind of just set it up. You have 30%, I have 40%, without really considering where the capital or the assets is going to come from. And then later, when there may have a dispute or a conflict or some kind of argument, the court will tend to look at your shares held in that company. So I think composition of shares is important as a first step in a company setup.
Talk about the shareholders. What are the other structure that exists in the PTPMA itself?
Well, I think once you've decided who is the shareholders, composition of shares, maybe also worth mentioning that you can have a few different types of shares in the sense that Indonesia has, like many other countries, A and B and C type shares. So A shares, you have shares and voting right. B shares, you don't have a voting right. You only own shares and get paid out your dividend. But the second most important aspect is the management of the company. And that's where what in Indonesian we would call direksi or directors and commissioners comes in. And I guess when we talk about a company, you have shareholders, and then you have a position which can be, you need minimum one commissioner, you can have several, but the commissioner is kind of overseeing the vision and mission of the shareholders towards the director or directors. You can also have multiple directors executing, the vision and mission of the investment that the shareholders does. Sometimes that's the same person, so a director and a commissioner will also own shares. Sometimes not. That depends. And I think on the management and aspect in particular to director, it's important to know for any shareholder, in particular foreigners, that the director is the one who is legally liable for any activity of the company. So things like tax compliance, permits are in order, no illegal activity and so on, the director is the one that is on the front line, if that makes sense, to make sure that's okay. And I think another thing is that if you are a director or the sole director, only one director, that director must also be a tax resident to Indonesia for tax compliance. And I think a lot of foreigners forget that. They may think that that's no problem, and in most cases it's not, but it gives the Indonesian tax authority the opportunity and the right to look at your worldwide income. So Indonesia can actually then tax that person on shares or assets that they own also in other countries in their country of origin.
So if, let's say, the foreigner come and want to operate and controlling their business in here, so your suggestion is they should become a director in the company?
I think from a control purpose, yes, you should. Okay. But be aware of that aspect. For some people, the tax residency is not an issue, and they may actually benefit from it in the sense that the tax brackets of Indonesia still is quite low compared to a lot of Western countries. But they need to be aware because they may have assets other places that impacts that eventually.
The director and also the shareholders will relate it also with the capital and the investment. A lot of questions that coming actually, what are the investment obligation and what are the amount and how is supposed to be the obligation then?
Yeah, I think you're right, and you're actually a real lawyer. I just talk about law, so you understand this better than I do. But there's a few things when we talk about modal or shares and paid up capital, I guess is the English word, where Indonesia operates with a few different levels of companies, so small, medium, large. And the only one they allow foreigners to invest in at this stage or set up is a large entity, and that's defined with a paid up capital of 10 billion or more. So we kind of talk about this as a gray area, which I'm not sure if that's right or not. When you read the regulation, the paid up capital should be complied with. But we see in practical terms, and maybe particularly in Bali, 75 to 80% of clients actually do not qualify in the sense that they don't comply with that. Normally, when they set up the company, this will be covered with what we call a notarial statement letter, that you have the capital or asset or available somewhere, and at some stage you will comply with that. Indonesia also seems to allow that to happen over some time, in the sense that you may open up your company, you then go to work on a business plan, and then step by step you comply with the paid up capital, you buy land, you invest in equipment, whatever the business is, and maybe we'll talk a bit about different business streams after this. And so far it seems that the Indonesian government aren't overly concerned with the paid up capital. What they are concerned about, and we'll talk about later, is taxes.
Yeah.
And with the recent news, we've seen immigration talks about paid up capital, BKM talks about it. Will that strengthening of enforcement come or not? I'm not sure. In one side, maybe yes, but I think there's also other elements in the Indonesian calculation of this that makes an impact to it. One is that Indonesia signs a lot of different trade agreements. We call them SEPA agreements, or with other countries that are free flow of, not free flow of, but easier regulated flow of capital, labor, trade, whatever, goods and so on. And these agreements also talk about this. And there's a few countries who have actually already raised that concern to Indonesia, saying that it's difficult for citizens of this country to set up companies in Indonesia, while it's easier for Indonesians to go the other way. So it becomes not a conflict, but an argument in this.
Right.
If that enforcement happens at some stage, and I think from time to time these social media news that sometimes are taken a bit out of proportions, I think, we always then say to clients that you have a plan A, you try to comply, and if you don't, and the enforcement comes, then I think what will happen is that friends will come together, or, two owners owns a couple of villas each, they make one PTMA, and by that they qualify. Or, companies like ours, we can do what we call an umbrella organization, so we have 5 different owners that owns shares equal to the proportion of what they have in terms of asset, and that way manage it. So I don't think that regardless of which way it go, I don't think that will be a big thing, and it remains to be seen now, I guess, with the new government of Indonesia, whether they will or not on this aspect.
Yeah, I think it's true. I think in the future, I think the government will do some adjustment or update on the regulation to, like you said, to enforce the regulation. For specifically for the investment in here. So with the investment itself, for sure, we know that there is a business category also that related in the PTPMA, and if and maybe you also read that there is a lot of category, the business category, or we know as a KBLI. So what are the KBLI? What do you think? And also, what are the requirements and also the minimum KBLI that the foreigner can choose for their business in here?
Yeah, I think the easiest way to explain what Indonesia calls KBLI is business stream. So what business are you investing in? And we were just talking about the paid-up capital and how that have some questions that the government needs to work out one way or the other. The aspect of that too, there are some KBLIs that the government actually do enforce, because this may be related to certain business streams that they actually want to see the paid-up capital. This is normally related to the aspect of where Indonesia operates with what we call a risk management system. So in the KBLI system, which when I look at it, it gets quite confusing because there's so many. But low to low, medium, and high risk. And the higher up you come in terms of risk, as in what kind of business. Let's say spa today is a high risk, F&B is high risk. Different business streams are protected by the government for different security reasons. You need additional permits. The low ranked sort of no risk or low risk, for instance, like real estate or consultancy, they have no additional need for permits. You're activated right away. I think that it's important for foreigners to realize too that if the KBLI, it's managed by codes, so there's like 5 numbers that identify a specific KBLI. If the first 2 digits are the same, then it's considered as the same business stream, and you can in most cases get away with 10 billion as paid-up capital. So for instance, like us, we do real estate, we can have 68111, which is owning, selling real estate, and we can have 68200, which is brokerage and so on. But if they're different, then it actually triggers another 10 billion in paid-up capital, or at least commitment, which sometimes is confusing because we obviously tell clients about this and recommend them to start with 1 KBLI, maximum 2, because of the discrepancy that happens between the business size and the paid-up capital. So they can add on these later. And as you know, the BKPM through the LKPM reports is requiring now reports on every business stream. So that's something that we sometimes see deeds that are set up, or companies that are set up with 5 or 10 or sometimes 20 different business streams. And then you have to go through and sort of adjust that. So I think that's important that people in their business plan think through how they want to do the business, what they start with, and then rather add on that additional business stream if they're adding on as they go along.
Yeah, I agree. I think it will be better to start with the main business that really want to operate in the beginning, then after that adjust or add, and after it goes well or something like that. So regarding the business, and also you talk about the risk itself of the of each category or KBLI. What are the process regarding to fulfill or comply with the regulation regarding to be able the company or the PMA itself legally operate or fulfill the license, basically?
Yeah, I think in terms of licenses, like we said, in terms of different KBLIs and different business streams, some of them activated right away. Some of them there is a ministry, like for instance, if you're in information, you need to go to the Ministry of Communication. If you're in other aspects, they have specific permits that still BKPM is issuing, but they coordinate them back to the respective ministry. So that's important to be aware of before people sort of get into it. I guess the second thing that we see often is people forget or they aren't aware that they need to maintain a company. So what we would call RUPS, or a shareholders meeting. Minimum once a year you should have that, a shareholders meeting. And if you have decisions that are important for the company, whether that is changes of shares or directors or other aspects, it should be documented as a shareholders meeting.
Yeah.
And very often we see people, they think they should have a shareholders agreement in between them, in addition to the deed of establishment that kind of governs the basic aspects, I guess, of a PMA, voting rights and so on. But sometimes they will have a lot of additional aspects in between them. And Indonesian legal system may not be that set for what they define as a shareholders agreement. So what we recommend then is that when you do these shareholder meetings, whether that is a ordinary yearly or extraordinary shareholders meeting, these agreements are voted on or worded as part of that meeting. So then the notary that then notarize the shareholders meeting, that becomes part of it. And if you then ever have a dispute in between shareholders or whatever it is, you can always refer back to an official legal document on that aspect.
General thing of shareholders, or we call it like a RUPS in here. And also you mentioned before regarding the investment report, that the obligation of the foreigner that's doing a business in here do every quarterly. So what are the others obligation from the foreigner then after the company legally operated? Yeah.
No, I think we touched on a bit of it, like a yearly shareholders meeting, and then like you say, what we call the LKPM, or the quarterly investment report, which is compulsory, and we can see that the investment ministry is not pushing, but they want that to be complied with. And if you don't, then they will make a note, and eventually it may red flag your company. Directors is also a thing that every 5 years minimum you need to appoint or reappoint.
Yeah.
If not, the bank will shut your accounts. So we see also clients who comes, oh, my account doesn't work, and it doesn't work because the bank obviously have figured out that the company papers are not in accordance. Taxes to me is the most important aspect, and this is where, again, in Bali we see a lot of unique ways of considering taxes, and in particular like in the recent news too, there was a lot of talk about SMEs or UMKM, where all foreigners are doing UMKM or SMEs, and it was good to see that the Balinese SMEs organization came out and said that we don't mind foreigners in the industry because it helps us uplift our own knowledge and capacity. But a PMA and an UMKM or SMEs is defined based on the revenue turnover of the company, and that's 4.8 billion, or about $300,000. Obviously, not every PMA qualifies to go beyond that right away, so they're still, in the eyes of the tax office, seen as an SMEs. But on the tax level and corporate taxes to begin with, Indonesia starts off with actually charging only 0.5% on revenue turnover as a corporate tax for the first 3 years, subject to the company not going up over 4.8.
Okay.
Once it goes over 4.8, then the second level kicks in, which is 11% from profit.
Okay.
And at that stage, you should also be a VAT liable. But VAT, again, in Bali is kind of like, it's talking about COVID. It's a disease that nobody wants to comply with. I think eventually the government will look at that too. If you go then beyond 50 billion, the tax level is 22% from profits. And this is where there's a lot of funny things, or we shouldn't talk about funny things in business, but strange behaviors. Like, for instance, another, what we call it, gray area, or like a lease. And we talk about that. I think we discussed it in the last podcast that we did with Donnie, where to me the Hakse-wise is just a mess, if I can use that word. In legal terms, you can't say a mess, but a structure that shouldn't really be out there, because I talk a lot more about HGB on top of freehold and Hakpakke as registered lease, and it doesn't make sense for Indonesia to allow this. But on a tax perspective, let's say I'm renting land from you or a property, and the tax compliance on that, very often we hear about clients that says, oh, I'm going to rent this for 5 billion. Let's just do 2 agreements, one official notarial, which is 2.5 billion. And then we have one kind of under the table. We still sign, but it is not notarial deed. So it doesn't get registered. And therefore we think that we don't need to pay taxes on that. And you as the landowner obviously save the 10%, or you pay half of what you should have paid. But then we get into the conflict of then a PMA that actually has to show all their capital. So sometimes there will be other instruments, legal instruments to qualify for that. Furnitures, which obviously, you need furnitures in a villa, but sometimes that value might be way too high. Other aspects of management, construction, and so on that justifies that other aspect. So from a tax perspective, then for the PMA, they may qualify that they can show that they've spent 5 billion. But what they forget is that when you later want to sell that, or when you operate the villa, you can actually depreciate a lease as a cost to reduce your 11% profit tax. So let's say you bought for 5 billion, and just to take a simple figure, 10 years lease, I can deduct 500 million a year in depreciation over that time frame. But if I only register 2.5, I can only deduct 2.5. So I may end up with a much higher profit tax because I wanted to help you save 15% when you rented out the land. So it doesn't make sense to me to do it. Sooner or later you pay. The other aspect that will come out of that, and is important on a PMA, is that you file a report as a PMA where, let's say, 2.5 billion is the property, another 2.5 billion is furniture, or whatever we want to call it. Then at some stage when you depreciate furnitures, the tax office has a guideline of how much they allow, depending on size, how many bedrooms, and so on. So you cannot put all of it in there. And that is a depreciation that goes much quicker than a lease. So you'll depreciate maybe half of the actual furniture list. At some stage you would think that the tax office sees there is a discrepancy. Not yet, but maybe at some stage, that there is a difference between the actual capital that was paid, what was depreciated as a property, and what was depreciated as furniture. But there's still a differentiation that they kind of like, well, where is that? How is this booked? And you will have possibly some questions from tax office. So again, taxes to me is important to be in compliance with, and the first thing I think that the government here are taking seriously to everyone to be in compliance with.
One of the important thing is tax, right? So for the company, then regarding from the tax, then how after, let's say, how do you think about the further investment or the business in Indonesia, specifically in Bali? What are the progress, and what will happen in the future regarding the business of doing a PTPMA in Bali, basically?
Again, I think it's really the only way that you can do investments. And I think that I kind of use the word about Indonesia as a country that really now quickly is normalizing their compliance and regulation. And I saw today an article about Prabowo, who is going to be our next president now in October, 20th of October. His image, according to his brother Hashim, is the president of China. So I think we can expect, in a good way, maybe a firmer drive and a firmer push for qualifications and compliance. And one of the things that Prabowo and Gibran, as the vice president, went on campaigning on when the presidential election was on, was to increase both the tax base, so number of people paying taxes, and the amount of taxes that people pay. So obviously to fulfill their commitments, I think now they're talking about another 10 different ministries, the free lunches for schools and kids. There's an awful lot of need for additional capital. And the main part of that is budgeted to come from tax collection.
So perhaps maybe from your side, is there any closing statement or maybe another aspect that you want to deliver?
I think we've covered most, different types of permits, reports, shareholders. Basically, just be, in compliance and forward thinking. Indonesian regulations, I don't think are going to be softened up. It will be softened up, maybe in the sense of what we talked about, that it'll be easier to invest as a foreigner. But the compliance, I think, will be driven more and more, and that's because I was actually in a meeting with the tax authority, Kanwil, so they oversee and they talk to us probably for many reasons. One, they look at their own taxes, but also in general about tax compliance. And one of them was saying that, well, we see this growth in Bali, a lot more people living here, a lot more investments happening, but the growth of tax collection is not in accordance. So something is missing out, which is then down to compliance. And I think the government will be more and more, wouldn't use the word aggressive, but more driven to push people in compliance. And all the regulation to do that is there. So good for people, I think. Be upfront and make sure you're in compliance and try to do what I call the good citizen approach, and it'll be okay, and you can enjoy a good investment in Bali and Indonesia.
Okay. Yeah, agree with the, hopefully the progress in Bali will be good for the investment. So for the foreigner, so I mean don't worry to do investment in here in Bali. So because we see, according to our discussion, we see it will be good, I mean the prospect perhaps in the future. And after that, from the law, hopefully, like you said, I mean from the next president or their cabinet, so it will be officially in this 20. So there will be some adjustment or updated in this some regulation to make the enforcement specifically in the law of investment, so will be more clear and more better.
No, I think you're right. I think the new government comes in now in October, but don't forget that also now we're going to have governor elections and bupati elections,
Indeed.
Which is for Bali's province and regions.
For the next November.
November will be the election, and then they will be sworn in, I think, in January next year.
Yeah.
So we will have new governors and new bupatis as well. That hopefully, work in line with central government guidelines and motivation and drive forward to grow Indonesia as a, like you say, a very good place to do investments, and in general, very welcome for foreign direct investments.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for being next to me and making sure I don't say anything wrong.
Yeah.